Aloha, welcome to the Live Ukulele podcast. My name is Brad Bordessa, and in this episode, I'm going to share some stories from the stage. Times when things went terribly wrong and gear malfunctions and stuff like that. I'm going to kind of dig into the back of my brain, see what I can remember in order to celebrate the launch of my new ebook, Plug In. Plug In is officially launching tomorrow, March 2nd, and it is an ebook about how to plug in your ukulele and, most importantly, how to get a good sound using the least amount of components and saving you the most amount of money. Because when it comes to plugging in your ukulele, it's really easy to think that you need more fancier kinds of things than you actually do. And what I want to try and do with the contents of the ebook is get you set right from the beginning to have all of the full potential to have a great sound, and then how to further tweak that great gear that you have to get the best sort of sound. So it's a 90-page ebook, PDF, and to go along with it, I made a series of 4 videos that take up an hour and a half worth of footage. And they're a walkthrough of me showing you how I mix my ukulele sound. So I recorded my ukulele into my computer, and then from there, that pickup sound that is recorded dry into the computer. It's kind of the worst case scenario because on the way into the ones and zeros of the computer, a piezo pickup never touches the air. So it's flat and dead and it sounds terrible. And throughout this video series, I work you through adding the different effects that kind of bring it to life, make it sound passable and usable. And then once that sound were to go out over a PA system or something, it would sound even better. So the concepts that happen within the DAW are things that can be applied to your live rig, and all of those concepts can be applied in a pedal board or multi-effect or something like that. There's also a quick start guide for folks who just kind of want to get going with visuals, hand-done visuals that I created that show the basic plugins, how to add a pedal, how to plug in your amp, basic amp settings, that kind of a thing. And then there's also a preset for the HX Stomp, which I use. And there's also a discussion forum if you have questions about your setup and maybe how to tweak the knobs to get a better sound. The launch is going to last until March 10th at midnight Hawaii Standard Time. So if you want to get in, you can get a 33% discount if you buy the book before then. So get in while it is currently $40. After the 10th of March, price is going to go up to $60. And learn how to optimize the sound of your ukulele, or if you're just getting started, how to buy the correct gear the first time instead of wasting money on things that might or might not help. You can just dive right in and bada bing, bada boom, you're set to go, and you should have a really decent sound. And I'm looking forward to the material helping you get there. If you want to find out more, check out the link in the podcast description. That will take you to the sales page where you can read more about the book and what is going on. Like I said, the official launch, the emails are going out tomorrow on Sunday. But if you are listening to this on the first Saturday, follow the link and you will be able to check it out and purchase your own copy. So I figured what better time to talk about bloopers on stage than here when I'm releasing this ebook. I thought I would share some stories until my voice goes out. You probably noticed that I've been a little bit sick with the band. Last week we had a raging show in a little tiny record shop, and there was we sold I think 54 cover fees tickets. There weren't tickets, but it was the cover charge. There were 54 or something people who came through the door and actually paid, and there were, I'm sure, more who did not pay, which is fine, but that's just the way it is. But in a tiny space, that's a lot of people and a lot of germs, and I picked up on at least one of them. So working through that, but I'll tell some stories until I can't tell anymore. My performance experience really breaks down into a number of different eras. And it all started, back when I started, the very first performances were flying by the seat of the pants for everything, but even more so for the tech stuff, for the gear. And from that standpoint, it was really super easy to get a bad sound because my ukulele at the beginning, my kamaka, which I first got a pickup in, that was the first instrument that I got with a plug-in, because the very nice guy at Soundwave Music a couple years earlier when I bought my first tenor ukulele, my folks bought me my very first soprano ukulele. It was pretty bad. It was not something that I wanted to play. And so I decided shortly thereafter, 6 months, 8 months in, that I wanted to upgrade. And so I bought myself as like a $120 laminate hula ukes ukulele. And it did the trick. It's a fine instrument. It's still going. I think my brother has it in Portland. And I was thinking at that time that, well, I'm going to upgrade. I'm going to buy a nicer instrument. I want to be performing and doing some of that stuff eventually. So maybe I'll just put a pickup in it. And the guy at the music shop was like, I wouldn't. Not on this level of an ukulele, because it's just the price to investment. When you add a pickup to an ukulele, even the cheapest pickup is probably like $100 installed. And that's probably for a, bottom of the barrel install, bottom of the barrel cheap stick-on soundboard transducer pickup. And he was like, you're buying a $120 ukulele. Why would you put a $100 pickup in it? Just wait, play a little bit more, get a little bit better. And then when you buy your next ukulele, which I'm sure will be a larger step up, then get your pickup. And, major kudos to him and major kudos to Soundwave Music for having employees who would give advice like that. And for the betterment of a young man who is just learning the ropes, to give that advice and cut themselves short on the sales because of that. That was a super sweet thing for him to do. So fast forward a couple years, I bought the kamaka, I had a pickup put in it, and the pickup was not installed very well. When I got it, I plugged it in and it didn't sound very good. And it's like, oh, well, it's a pickup. I haven't done this before. Maybe this is just how they sound, all that kinds of stuff. But after I had used it for a while, I fought it, and it just wasn't working. And so I got a preamp, and I think I got an acoustic amp to try and make it sound better, to do the things like impedance mismatch, fix those kinds of problems, to boost the level, things that I didn't know about, but kind of intuitively was figuring out on the fly. And those things helped, but it still was not very good. And so it turned out that the pickup wasn't installed in a good spot. That was a soundboard transducer, one of those that sticks on the bottom of the soundboard of the ukulele. And when you move your arm, you hear it moving all about. And they can sound really good, but typically for a performing musician, they'll tend to go for the under saddle pickups instead of something that's stuck to the soundboard. Just from a technology standpoint and a pros and cons standpoint, the USTs, the under saddle pickups, tend to be more feedback resistant, and they don't catch the arm noise, and they're a little bit more consistent, whereas the soundboard transducers can be a little bit more of a nightmare to deal with. And that's what I learned, is that if it's not installed right, if it's not in the exact right position, it's going to sound bad. But then also once it is even in a better position, it's still not all that. And so I rocked that soundboard transducer for my first kind of stint of performing, which was me playing with the Wong brothers. And we would play here and there little tiny things for the homeschool group, or I remember we went down to Lava Java in Kona back when Kona wasn't as much of a tourist trap, dingy, dumpy place. No offense if you live in Kona, but that part of town has gotten old and tired, and it happens with the tourist town thing. But we'd play there, and we'd play through the Wong's Fishman upright stack amp. If you remember those, you've been doing this for a while, because they stopped making them a long time ago. And we'd dial it in as best we could, but we didn't really know what we were doing. And there we would struggle to hear ourselves and struggle to get a sound that wasn't cardboardy or shrieking, piercing bright. It was always a fine balance to try and get a good sound. And, that's all part of the foundational stuff. I'd like to say that I think that I learned a lot in that time frame, but it was just, it's such, you have to whack off the big chunks of bad decisions and bad sounds and, poor settings at the beginning. And you have to do a lot of that before it really makes a difference in the sound that you're getting. And that was that phase. It didn't necessarily mean that we were like, oh, well, last week we learned that if we said it just this way, it's going to sound so much better. It wasn't anything quite so obvious as that. It was just, that constant grind of, well, we still sounds kind of bad, but we're getting that out of the way and trying things and learning that kind of stuff. But then fast forward again to when I went to college. I spent quite a bit of time before and after college playing here and there. I played a lot with my friend Hualalai. We played through crappy portable PA systems that inherently sounded bad. So I kind of got used to that. That wasn't any sort of a big deal. But then I went over to Maui for the Institute of Hawaiian Music. And that's where we spent tons of time playing lots of gigs in lots of different rooms, lots of different spaces with lots of different sound systems. And that's where I think the consistency started to come along, and I really started to realize what I needed to bring to the table. Because when you're out performing, you're really at the mercy of the sound person. And some are wonderful and some are not so wonderful. And the not so wonderful ones are not going to give you any sort of help. If you don't send them exactly what you want to hear through the PA, you're never going to get it. You can't tell them like, oh, why don't you scoop out 3 dB at 240 and that'll fix the woofy issue. Like, even if you know those numbers to throw out, if you know what your ukulele needs, it doesn't really matter because they're going to, be grumpy about that because they're waiting for their coffee to come or whatever it might be. And so from just the repetition of playing in a bunch of bad rooms, some rooms sound really good. You set up the PA, it just sounds great. There's nothing more to be done. Some rooms sound really bad. Just the size of the room affects how the sound waves bounce around in it. And where you put the PA system within that room, it impacts how the sound waves move about and interact with each other. And sometimes when everything's wrong, and, depending on where you're standing in the room, the sound will change drastically. So if your spot on stage, back then it was lots of groups. We'd play, it was usually at least trios. If not, sometimes we played with 6 or 7 people all on stage. If your spot was right in a knoll or a spot where the sound waves combined, you would be hearing like way too much of one frequency all night. And that's just what you got. And because you're standing there getting so much of that frequency is kind of playing your instrument for you at that frequency. There's just too much of it going on. That's where you have just an overpowered sound in that frequency range. So, ideally, you will find what the problem frequency is and you'll duck it out a little bit. And, these days in our band, Alan's got a wireless system and he goes out in the crowd and he adjusts the EQ on his phone so that everything sounds balanced and it's a piece of cake. He does a good job. We know our setup. It's so easy nowadays. But back then it was a major struggle. And so somewhere along the way, I think when I was in Maui, I got a MySci pickup put in, or maybe I got the pickup put in right before I went to school. And the MySci was a major upgrade, just from, not necessarily from the sound standpoint, because like I said earlier, the soundboard transducers tend to sound really good. They just have a lot of downsides. One of them is that you always have to have an outboard preamp to bring them up to level and to match the impedance. But it just from a performance, like the craft of performing, the USTs are just superior in most ways because they simplify things. You're not fighting the feedback. You're not hearing the arm all the time. The volume is more steady and consistent. You're not spiking things. as much. It's just a better deal for the most part, unless you are really nerdy with your gear and have a way to get away with a straight up microphone on the stage or a soundboard transducer. But for the most part, for most people, the UST, like a MySci or the LR Bags 5.0 or a Fishman Matrix, if you gotta, those will tend to give more consistent stage results. The trade-off, though, is that they sound more plasticky, usually. And to my ears, the Bags doesn't have that as much. The Fishman is really bad, in my opinion. Like, you listen to Jake play, and to me, all you hear is the thwack, thwack, thwack of the pick attack or the fingernails on the strings. And to me, that's like what I don't want. So I'm a happy Bags element user, and I like the way they voice their preamps better. I think it's more natural. But that's all beside the point, because I got the MySci, and the MySci was cool. It was fine, but once again, it wasn't the be-all, end-all. I had a little bit of trouble with it. So the saddle wasn't flat enough, or the bottom of the saddle slot wasn't flat enough, and there was uneven string balance. So I took the ukulele. I probably walked the ukulele up the hill from Kahului to the Mele ukulele store, which was up the hill towards Wailuku, and asked them, like, can you take a look at this? Like, something's not right. And so actually what their tech did was cut slots in the bottom of the saddle so that the saddle could flex a little bit. And I think he made a new one out of some sort of newfangled synthetic material. But cutting the saddle into several pieces, not all the way to the top, but cutting up a ways into the bottom of the saddle helped it sit a little bit more evenly in the saddle slot. And I think to this day, unless Chuck did some work on it. Oh, Chuck put the MySci in, because I have a picture of Chuck with a reamer tool putting the jack hole in the bottom of the Kamaka. So yeah, Chuck must have done that before I went to school, put the MySci in, and it wasn't balanced. Probably, I imagine, because of the bottom of the saddle slot, which I don't think he rerouted, which is fine. Of course, you're not going to do that unless you really need to. And then I got the saddle adjusted, so we were kind of doing the compensation from the top side, because for those UST saddles to work, at least the Bags, it has to be an even pressure all the way along. If it's not squeezing as much in one spot along the saddle, then you're not going to get as much volume. And if it's squeezing a lot, you're going to get more volume. So getting that squeeze to be even across the strings is important. And so by cutting slots in the saddle, they were able to kind of remedy that problem. And that was... It was good enough to get by for the rest of going through school. And during that time, I had a couple different pedals. I think I had at least two, and I tried a bunch of different stuff, because it was 2 or 3 gigs sometimes every single week, just bang, 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 different spaces, different rooms, different PAs. And so the value of having a good sound like coming out of your output jack on your pedals was really key. So I learned how to adjust stuff. I had a Zoom, I think it was the G3 multi-effect when it first came out, which was fine. It had some EQ and stuff that I was able to use. I think I mostly used it for just EQ and reverb and maybe a little delay. Nothing fancy there. I had that fail and another Zoom fail, so I'm not a big fan of the Zoom pedals, at least not back in that era. Whatever production stuff they were doing wasn't super high quality. And then I moved up to the Boss ME70, it would have been. And that one was great. I really used the hell out of that for a lot of years, because it has the EQ. You can set the preamp section to be I think it's low, mid, high, mid, and highs EQ, which is not ideal. Like for acoustic instruments, you usually want the parametric EQ, so you can sweep the mid frequency. That's a lot more helpful in finding the problems with an ukulele pickup sound. But it was good enough. It kind of got me by, and it had a bunch of other effects, which, the younger me was excited to try out all those noises and stuff and make sounds. And I think that time in IHM, in addition to teaching us how to just perform better as musicians and how to play more consistently, and like sometimes, so I said I would talk about some bloopers, and a lot of them come to mind from that IHM era because it was really the first time for a lot of us playing out and about, playing out professionally, and experiencing live sound, and having so many different sound people we were working with, so many different sound systems. And there weren't like too many major moments, but it was more like the ideas. Like you'd go with Uncle George, we'd pack the sound system into the Prius, and we'd fit 3 of us. It was usually Uncle George, myself, and brother Axel. We'd all, or one of the other folks from IHM, one of us kids usually, we'd get in the car with Uncle George and we'd go to a gig, play a farmer's market or whatever. And the rest of the PA, in addition to us, plus instruments, Uncle George plays a big 12-string guitar, so big old giant guitar case, and then a PA system and 2 ukuleles usually, and mic stands and all the cables and everything to go with. And playing with Uncle George takes duct tape off of things and puts it back on the roll, just to set the scene. Like that's Uncle George. And if there's any kind of extra food from anything, sketchy or not, he'll pack it up and he'll put it in the icebox. And it was those same sort of principles for sound stuff. And he had it was a powered Carvin speaker, and I think there was a daisy chain, like a slave speaker that went along with that. Like one had the amp in it, and then the next one down the line was unpowered, and it took power from an output on the amp speaker. And so it was this double speaker thing. It sounded pretty good. It was fine, but it only had a couple of channels. So what we'd end up doing, there's 4 of us playing. There's only, 2 real channels and an extra channel or something like that. So what we would end up doing is we would run stereo. We'd run one guy into the left side of a channel and one guy into the right side of the channel, and you had to adjust your volume from your pedal or your pickup if you had to get the balance from that channel, because there was only one volume knob on the channel. And so we had to get the gain staging right outside of the mixer on the speaker. And then from there, you'd turn it up and you would have your volume. But like learning workarounds like that stand out, especially with that Carvin. That was not enough PA for what we were trying to do with it. And making do. A lot of times some people get caught up on it needs to be the best. It needs to be really good. And like you go play with Uncle George, and the music that came out of those speakers was, not us, but from him, was world class. Even with the janky setup and even with not enough channels, we'd make it work, and it was always fine. And it was good because it was about the music. And so those moments were fun and special because, love Uncle George to death, but he's got enough knowledge of tech stuff to get along, but he'd rather not deal with that. But when it was just us out on the road, we'd go, tour around and play a couple gigs a day on a weekend in Maui, and it was just us. So it was his knowledge of running PA stuff and my knowledge. I was, we were taking a recording technology class at the time, and that I really connected with that. And so I was really interested in the tech side of things and understanding how it all was connected and how to adjust it and things like that. And so a lot of times, he would defer to me a little bit. And it's funny that still kind of happens to today. It's like, if you want to handle that, go for it. I was like, I just want to play music. It's not super duper. Wasn't one of his babies really. So like if getting the sound out there was just a secondary goal to the gig. Another one that stands out is we were playing this veterans benefit concert somewhere down on Dairy Road, right at the corner, in Kahului, coming out of the airport, I think. It was in a little shopping center thing. There might have been a bar there. I can't remember. But they brought in this big stage and this big sound system. I think it wasn't Augie T, it was the other one. What was his name? What is his name? Andy Bumatai. Andy Bumatai was there and was telling questionable jokes about the veterans. That was not my scene at all. But we got up on stage with one of our groups. I can't remember who exactly was performing out of the school roster. But we got up on stage and we had, there's a sound guy and everything. We played our set and it was fine. I don't remember it being special, but I remember that when we were clearing off the stage, a lot of times those festival things, the MC buys you as much time as possible, but otherwise you try and hustle because the other guys you have to get off and the other guys have to get on to set up the next group that's going to go up. And it might have been I think Amy played at that gig. Amy Hanai Lee might have been after us. So we were like, oh God, let's, get the hell out of here. So Amy can get up on stage because, didn't want to have anything to do with slowing up a high-end operation like that. And I remember I looked at the sound guy. I was like, am I good to unplug? He's like, yeah, he gives me the thumbs up. And I ripped the cord out. Boom. And this was full sound system, big wattage, subwoofers, the whole nine. And just bang, exploded that cord. And it wasn't my fault because he gave me the all good and I asked. And that's why you ask, is that you double check to make sure, are we good to unplug? Is everything off or don't have any loud pops going on? But I think that was the loudest pop I've ever heard. I don't know why it was so loud, but it's just it stuck with me. It was like, oh my God. But that kind of thing happens. It's just part of being in the showbiz. That was on him. And, it's, you always check. You always check because you try and avoid that. But when you don't, it happens. And sometimes it scares you. And I'm sure we laughed about it. I'm laughing about it now. Those kinds of things are funny. But yeah, boom. That's why you always turn down your volume. And I don't know technically what the consensus is on this, but Sterling, who used to run the sound at the Slack Key show for many, many years, but certainly while we were at IHM and would go out to the Slack Key show, a lot of times we'd ride out there in Sterling's Jeep. And he would always, because he was running sound, what he would do to get up on stage and plug his guitar in is he would unplug from the DI. So if you unplug from the DI side, it doesn't tend to pop or not nearly as much. And so what he would do is he would get up on, because he would play in the show, but he was also running sound. And so in order to collect his guitar and get up on stage and then plug in, he wasn't able to get back to the mute button to unmute himself. So he would leave his channel open. His channel would be hot. And he would get up on stage, plug in his guitar on the guitar side, and then he would leave, but the cable would be left out of the DI box. And then to get his sound to the system, he would then plug the cable in on the DI side and it wouldn't pop. And so that's always a secondary trick, is if you're not sure, you can unplug from the DI side and it'll tend to be quieter. I don't know I have never really looked into that to know if that's actually a thing or if it's just kind of like an audio myth. If anybody knows, shoot me an email. I'd love to know more about it. Another one that comes to mind is we played at, I think it was the opening ceremony for a TEDx event in Wailea down in South Kihei. We were at one of the big hotels because there's pictures and we were playing in a courtyard, on the beach side of the hotel, and behind there's all these not high rise, but a tallish white hotel building behind us. And that was a big, that was a big show. I have a picture of there's 10 of us on stage, along with Uncle George and Uncle Sheldon Brown played with us, who is a wonderful ukulele player who was kind of unknown, never had any much time in the spotlight, but played amazing music with his brother, Uncle Kevin Brown, part of the Wai'ehu Sons, who put out a couple of phenomenal Hawaiian records back in the 70s. But at that gig, there was plenty of us IHM students all there. And I think we opened up for Makana. Makana came on right after us to play and, blew us all away with his Slack Key stuff. But I remember very vividly that Uncle Tom Pollard, who has now passed, he had an old Ovation guitar that he played and he didn't have a pickup in that guitar for some reason. I'm not sure why. Like, I thought those Ovations, like, that was the whole point, was that they plugged in. Maybe it was broke. I don't know. But he had the stick-on soundboard transducer, but on the outside, like the one that you literally stick on with like sticky tack, and that's how it picks up the sound, is from there. And that whole gig was a nightmare. I can't remember what else happened. I think we struggled with the sound. People's stuff wasn't working. But Uncle Tom got up there, and like when it was his turn to shine, he like stepped up to the mic to do his song, and he was also stepping on the cable that was attached to his stick-on soundboard transducer. And he went to step forward, and bang, it popped off the top of his guitar. And, you know, he had to find it on the ground and brush it off, dust it off, and then try and stick it back on or whatever. And, you know, my buddy Adam always teased him like, "Oh, you forgot, you gotta get your bubble gum to stick the pickup back on." But yeah, that was a wild one. I don't remember exactly what went wrong. I think it was the extra pressure, at least for me, knowing that Makana was going to be next, and that there was like this big gun guy who was getting ready to go, and he was side stage like watching us, and it was like, oh, this is so bad. This is not the set that I want Makana to see, and, you know, to see us as. It was not a very representative set of how good we could do. And, you know, back then it was all pretty bad, speak for myself, but you know, that one was especially rough, and we just struggled to make it into any kind of a thing. But then I came home from school, and that would have been around the time that I got my first Chuck Moore ukulele. He built the spruce top one for me, and that had the Bags 5.0 in it, and that was a major upgrade from, I mean, electronics wise. I mean, of course the ukulele was way better than the Kamaka. But electronics wise, it was a way better foundation to work from, because in my experience, the Bags 5.0, if it's installed right, does tend to sound better, more naturally than the My side. Just for my taste. But just whatever Chuck did with the install, it was perfect. It has always been perfect. It was super easy to use and super easy to really start getting into the nitty-gritty part of plugging in an ukulele. And so, you know, with that ukulele, and for a long time it was the Boss ME70. I would go play lots of gigs with Hualalai. Afterwards, we'd pack in, there was a little vegan restaurant thing that they did like Friday night music, and we'd go down there and play music just for dinner. It was super low key, but it was a good scene for a while, and good people, and we'd go hang out. But it was always, with him, it was always bad PAs. So I had a great ukulele with a great pickup going into a mediocre pedal that did the trick, but it was good enough, into a horrible $500. It was the Fender Passport, the early Fender Passport PAs. With all the speakers were all blown out, and one of them was missing a cover. And, you know, like the speaker input jack, because those speakers are passive and the amp is in the mixer box. Those speakers are passive, and, you know, the speaker input jack for the speaker cable going out to the speaker was like wired onto the speaker, because it got busted off. Like, Hualalai has a number of children, and at that time they were children, and they'd play with stuff and things would just get absolutely destroyed. I think that was really good for me, because I tend to be a little bit of a perfectionist as far as like sonic stuff goes. I've kind of gotten over it as far as music, but getting things to sonically sound good is still super important for me. But that time spent with Hualalai for however, you know, run of a number of many years that we played with bad PA systems in, you know, off-grid random spots, you know, through other people's bad PA systems, and on and on and on. It was sort of like that lo-fi sound was part of what we did, because I played backup for his music, which is amazing, original, like rock, reggae, just, you know, only in his background could bring that kind of music into the world, and it's wonderful. But it would just always have that tinge of sounding bad from the PA. The music would be killer. We'd kick ass with the music, but the PA would be kind of lo-fi. And that taught me that, it's not necessarily about sounding the best, and that as long as it's passable and good and you give it good material, that's one of those things that, like, it gold in, gold out is something that people always talk about in the recording industry. But I think that was one of those things where even if the PA wasn't very good, what was going in was gold. The music was amazing. Like, the sounds were pretty good. He'd just play a beat up acoustic guitar with a pickup in it. And so it would sound pretty good going in, and it would sound pretty good coming out. And I think that that's one of those things where, like, the PA is one of the least important pieces of the signal chain as far as electronics go. Like, if your pickup's good, if you're not ruining it with bad settings in your pedal, it's probably going to be fine. And as long as you're playing good music and you're playing it well, playing to the pickup, which is another thing that, that's definitely something I learned in IHM, was that the way you play the instrument changes when you play live. When you play with that pickup, because, sometimes you get on stage and it's the sound engineer doesn't know what the hell he's doing or she is doing, and you have a feedback spot on the stage where you're standing, and this buildup of sound, your ukulele is going to try and feed back. And if you want to play the ukulele and not have it feed back, you got to keep your arm across the ukulele, physically restraining it from vibrating as much in order to dampen that sound and to avoid the feedback, or, play with your ukulele pointed a certain way while you're singing into the mic. Maybe your ukulele is pointed to the side, but you're singing straight ahead, like all that kind of stuff. It really makes a difference how you approach playing the instrument to get the best sound into the PA. But, moving on from there, I don't feel like there was a whole lot of innovation in my pickup sound until I got the Line 6 HX Stomp was really the next step in sound, and when I really kind of got back into being passionate. Because you go through phases where you have a piece of gear and you max out what you can do with that, and then either you add to it a little bit, or you realize, this is all extra, I don't actually need this. And getting the Line 6 really gave me a lot more options as far as what I could do. And now I had unlimited EQ. Any shape EQ that I wanted to do, I could do that. I could do parallel paths where you have processing only on half of the signal or whatever mix of the signal you want. And it also has the impulse response stuff, which Fishman has been doing for a lot of years in the Aura product line, but that was always didn't necessarily seem like the best match for ukulele because it was all guitar based. And I think that was probably, I've never tried it. I don't know, but I expect that it's probably not as good of a match as it could be if it was ukulele specific. So this gave me the opportunity to do ukulele specific impulse responses, which is a big game changer. And, it does everything else. So there was never any wondering like, I wonder if I should get this next pedal or that next pedal or anything like that. It was always just very solid, allowed me to do exactly what I wanted. And that inspired kind of this next step of really jumping in to get a great sort of ukulele sound. And so all that to say, it's been a long time coming to get to where I'm at now. I've since, running live sound is very similar to mixing and doing engineer work like for recordings. And I've done two albums. I did an EP. The Point A EP was my first one where I kind of very, very first learned to mix, how to balance instruments, to try and EQ things the right way so they would sit together. And it's not very good. It doesn't sound very good. But it was a start. And then there was If Only, which was the full LP, which, also doesn't sound the best compared to what I can do today, but was, for the time and for what I knew, I think a pretty good offering. And all of that information trickles down into what you can do or what you should maybe do for your ukulele in a live setting. So like if you EQ something a certain way to sound good on an album, a lot of that stuff is going to translate to live. It won't be exactly the same because, like, for instance, like my last release, which is the Eat You single, which I think did turn out sonically really nice. I was happy with how that sounds. It sounds full and it sounds pretty much like how I would hope a recording of ukulele like that would sound. but those EQ curves don't necessarily, they're good for like playing in that sort of a instrumentation with steel guitar and bass and, you know, another ukulele. Like that's great. That's what it was mixed for. But if you try and take that to Kingside, my rock band, I'm going to just get destroyed because those EQ curves are not what is going to let me cut through for that band. Everything lives in a different place. There's a different kind of bass, there's drums now, and then Ryan plays the electric guitar. So we kind of have to like decide and divide up where our sound frequencies are going to live. Like I get to live mostly here, you get to live mostly here, so we can stay out of each other's way. And it's mostly me and Ryan who have to decide that because the drums are just the drums. It's all attack. That's basically it. The drums don't take up much space. They're just loud. And then the bass guitar is low on the low end. So, you know, Alan's not doing anything in the mid-range where Ryan and I are. And then we just have to decide like where we're going to be in the mid-range. And I realized the other day I was cutting out a little bit of 600 hertz. And when I put that back in, all of a sudden my sound just like pushed forward just that little bit more to kind of cut through. And so just the other day I added, instead of my boost just being a clean boost, I brought the clean boost down so that like for playing leads when I want to jump out in front a little bit more. Instead of just being a clean boost, I increased the gain on one of my EQ bands. So now it boosts a little bit, but it also boosts in the 800 hertz range, which helps kind of cut through. And so sculpting the sound in that different way really makes a big difference. And one size does not fit all. Even for the same ukulele, you take the same ukulele and you put it in different situations, you're going to need different EQs at least in order to sound right in different kinds of things. And like if I take that preset that I use for Kingside and I try and go play like Hawaiian style ukulele with Uncle Kyoki and Larry, that's slack key guitar and upright bass. It's a whole different palette of musical sounds. A lot of times that Kingside preset won't sound as good and I'll use something different. It's a little bit more open and airy because I'm not really competing with anything else except the slack key guitar. And just the way those instruments sit, they're already kind of differentiated. And it's a very long learning experience. But all that to say, I wrote the ebook from that background and having had all of those experiences and tried all those things and worked through playing, you know, and owning and experimenting with tons of pedals, you know, tens and tens of different pedals and different multi-effects. And then later on, more recently, mixing albums and, you know, producing songs and putting songs out into the world. And it all kind of comes full circle and comes back around. And I want to be able to share that with folks because I see a lot of people struggle. I see a lot of people who don't know what to do and they're just guessing and they're just hoping. And you shouldn't have to learn to be an engineer to plug your ukulele in at an open mic. Like there's a happy medium. You want to know some stuff so you can get a good sound. You know, like if no one else is doing it, you can adjust your EQ on your ukulele and get a little bit better tone. But you also, like, you don't need to go to sound engineer school to do that. So that's what I tried to write the book for, is like, okay, here's a 90-page PDF download of like the key stuff that's really going to impact you as an ukulele player. And once you get through the gear stuff and you like have the gear, it's mostly the chapter on adjusting things, which is by far the longest chapter and the one that I'm most excited about sharing. Adjusting those things is the biggest part of the picture. So I tried to make it really streamlined. I'm sure there's stuff I missed. If there's anything in it, anything that you want to see in it, let me know and I'll put that in the hopper for an updated edition, because, you know, there are things like I realized the other day that I didn't cover like a boost, like a clean gain boost for taking a solo or whatever. Not that that's really, that's kind of an obvious thing to integrate if you need it for your situation, but like I didn't talk about that. So that might be useful for some people in the future. So let me know what you think, if you think it's comprehensive enough or what gaps you would like to see, and I'll try and update that as soon as possible to kind of make sure that it's the most useful guide possible without being a whole tome on audio engineering because I don't want it to be that. That's too complicated and too technical, and a lot of people don't want that. You just need to know how to adjust the simple things that make you sound good and make sure that when you plug in, all the electronics are talking to each other correctly. And beyond that, just play music. You don't need to know that stuff unless you're interested in it. So check out the link in the podcast description. Plug-in is available now for 33% off during this launch week, which will end March 10th at midnight Hawaii Standard Time. Check it out. Let me know what you think. And yeah. This is the Live Ukulele Podcast, published on the first and third Saturdays. I will see you later in the month. I talked to Maya. Maya and I had a great conversation. Maya Miyashiro. And we had a really nice conversation. Super fun to talk story with her. But she reached out the other day. It was like, I want to redo it, or I want to add to it. Or she said, I think I want to redo it because I've kind of changed directions on some of my artistic stuff. I was like, okay, that's fine. Maybe we can add to it, or update it so we don't have to lose all of our good conversations. But that's up in the air. I'll let you know what we end up with that. That might be coming out next for the interview this month. If not, we'll see. And Joey and I have a date for recording a podcast on singing, so that could be this month as well. We'll see. But stay tuned. The Live Ukulele Podcast is always produced and created with the intention of the utmost entertainment in mind, so that you can listen while you're walking your dog or riding your bike or commuting to work, and to get some good ukulele vibes and bring you interesting insight, interesting topics, interesting guests. Subscribe. I'll catch you next time. And until then, be well out there, be kind out there, and hui hou.